Today's show is sponsored by CloudZero. For software-driven companies focused on growing margins, CloudZero is the only cloud cost intelligence platform that puts engineering in control by connecting technical decisions to business results. By analyzing cloud services like AWS and Snowflake, CloudZero provides real-time cost insights that help you maximize margins. Engineering teams can answer critical questions like, who are my most expensive customers? How much does this specific feature cost our business? What's the cost impact of re-architecting this application? With cost anomaly alerts via Slack, product-specific data views, and granular engineering context that makes it easy to investigate any cost, CloudZero is your complete cloud cost intelligence platform, connecting the dots between high-level trends and individual line items. Join companies like Drift, Rapid7, and SeatGeek by visiting cloudzero.com/cloudcast to get started today. That's cloudzero.com/cloudcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from our massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And we've got a great guest this week coming up after Cloud News, someone we've had on our kind of target list, if you will, for a little while. But before we get into that, let's jump right into Cloud News of the Week. Got some really good articles here. First off, Amazon and iRobot. If you follow iRobot and Roomba, first of all, if you're a techie and listening to this, you probably already have one. But secondly, they also were really big in the serverless space. You know, back in the serverless conf days, they were really big there. And they've always been very proud of their architecture, and I've talked very openly about it. And Amazon came along and scooped them up, and a pretty good price, $1.7 billion or thereabouts. One interesting tweet I did see that was interesting as Amazon gets into the home space more and more with Alexa and, smart thermostats and everything else going on. Well, somebody said, did they just acquire the home maps of a lot of people in the world? And yeah, they might have. So Alexa and Amazon and home domination continues with this one. Moving on to our second article, and this is actually the Cloud Database Report Substack. And by the way, if you're not subscribed to that, go subscribe to it. Really, really good information over there. But it basically references a Gartner report talking about the revenue that has been out there by the big cloud providers. Now, what's interesting here is Microsoft was number one last year. They're number one again this year. But by a hair, AWS jumped from third place into second place at 23.9% versus Microsoft's 24%. So at the end of the day, I mean, you might as well call them 1 and 2. Oracle fell to number 3. Google moved into number 4. And SAP kind of dropped off. I think they were either 4 or 5, and they're no longer on the list, and IBM's on at 5. So it's interesting to see the changes that are happening in this space, and this is a natural evolution, and actually something we're going to be talking about after the break with our guest, all about the dominance and the trends we are seeing in public cloud going forward. And as more applications and architectures switch to cloud native, this actually makes perfect sense as well. Now, if I move on to our third and final news item for this week, Cloudflare. Cloudflare put out some great financial results. They raised their full year guidance. They beat on their revenue, and the share price jumped like 25%, 27%, somewhere in there. And revenue was up 54%, and that is multi-quarter now, 54%. And $234 million, which beat analyst predictions as well. So they are doing just fantastic, and they are really joining some of the ranks of these newer, just very high growth tech companies, and it's really good to see them achieve that. And with that, I'm going to wrap up Cloud News of the Week. Coming up right after the break, we have Jordan Novet, technology reporter over at CNBC, and we're going to be talking about cloud and following the cloud money.
Today's show is sponsored by Lightstep Incident Response. Built on the ServiceNow platform used by over 6,000 companies worldwide, Lightstep Incident Response allows you to scale your incident response team without adding to your monthly bill. With intelligent on-call scheduling and escalations, you get the full context of your service health. Lightstep Incident Response immediately pinpoints issues and uses machine learning to send group text, reducing your time to respond. And you can seamlessly orchestrate alert and incident triage with on-call scheduling across Slack, Teams, Zoom, desktop, and mobile. So get started today with a free 30-day trial of Lightstep Incident Response by visiting lightstep.com/cloudcast. That's lightstep.com/cloudcast. And get a free t-shirt after your first alert or incident. Datadog is a SaaS, cloud monitoring, and security platform that enables full-stack observability for modern infrastructure and applications at any scale, providing teams dashboarding, alerting, application performance monitoring, infrastructure monitoring, UX monitoring, security monitoring, and log management in one tightly integrated platform, plus 450 plus out-of-the-box integrations with technologies including cloud providers, databases, and web servers. Aggregate all your data into one platform for seamless correlation, enabling teams to troubleshoot and collaborate together in one place, preventing downtime and enhancing performance and reliability. Get started with a free 14-day trial by visiting datadog.com/cloudcast. That's datadog.com/cloudcast. And we're back. And Aaron, it's good to have you back. Hope you're feeling better.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks. Lots and lots of meds, but feeling a lot better.
Yeah. Aaron, we've been doing this show for a long time. Anybody who's been listening knows we have a few basic housekeeping things, a few rules we have about the show. What's rule number one?
Well, so I don't know if you're referring to the old rule number one or the new rule number one. The old rule number one was no storage and no VDI, but that's probably not what we're talking about
No,
today. You're probably talking about follow the money, Brian.
It is follow the money. That is, we've always said, look, the technology comes and goes, but if you really want to figure out how things happen in this industry, where things are going in this industry, you really got to follow the money. And the best person to help us do that, and today's guest, is going to be what Aaron and I consider sort of a longtime friend of the show, but really an internet friend of the show, and somebody we're just getting to know for the first time in person, Jordan Novett, who is the cloud reporter, kind of the cloud expert over at CNBC. Jordan, welcome to the show.
Brian, Aaron, really nice to be with you both. It's something I've wanted to do for a long time, and I'm glad we're doing it today. So thanks for having me. Absolutely.
Well, listen, we always, it gets to be about this time of the year, 4 times a year. We always say it's Jordan Novett season. It's cloud money season. If you follow our Twitter feed, that's what we're talking about. Give folks a little bit of background, because you are, you're one of the people at CNBC who's responsible for covering the cloud, but you do more than that. Give folks a little bit of your background before we dive into stuff.
Yeah. Thanks, Brian. I am a technology reporter. That's my title at CNBC on our digital side, which means that I'm writing for CNBC.com. And if we have big enough stories coming from our website, then they will talk about it on television, our channel. And so I've been doing that for 5 years. And I am the Microsoft reporter. And it's true, I cover the more general public cloud, and as well as a little bit of the SaaS. And under my purview also is supposed to be artificial intelligence, although I don't write a ton about that. So that's what I have been doing lately. And I live in Oakland, and I commute 3 days a week to our San Francisco bureau. Our headquarters is in New Jersey. And so I was just out there in July. But usually we are able to operate, very well out here independently with our technology reporters who cover the individual companies who are mostly out here. And I should say that I got into the world of technology reporting because I ended up in Bend, Oregon after graduating from college. And I found myself on the business desk of the daily newspaper, the Bend Bulletin. And I had about 8 beats. One of them was technology. I also wrote about craft brewing with Deschutes Brewery.
Nice.
And economic development, tourism, real estate, unemployment, really the gamut of business coverage in a local paper. And just being exposed to technology led me to be invited to the opening of Facebook's first data center that it had built from the ground up in Prineville, Oregon, 40 minutes away from Bend. And I was with the national press who had flown in some cases. And I was seeing this stuff up close for the first time. This is 2010, I believe. And I said, oh my gosh, this is kind of impressive in a nerdy way, right? And so that gave me an opportunity to join the tech press here in the Bay Area when I moved down in 2013. And I worked at GigaOM and I worked at VentureBeat. And in 2017, I did join CNBC. And I've covered Microsoft for 8 years now, right as Satya was joining as Chief Executive Officer. And it's been wonderful to focus a little bit more on the financial aspect of covering these large companies rather than a little bit more of the technology and product aspects. So that's me a little bit.
So Jordan, it's funny because you're probably the first true journalist we've had on the show. We've had lots of analysts and lots of techie types, and so it's interesting to see how you came into it, because coming in with first Facebook data center and as things are kind of rising up in Silicon Valley and the rise of cloud, and so it's really good to see all of that and to bring it forward even a little bit more, where the economy is very different from when it was, like we were talking about before we hit record, what it was like when Brian and I started the podcast, and you similar when you were kind of getting into journalism. And we're in a different phase of the economy right now. Like we're in the kind of sort of close to post-pandemic years, right? And so what are the big trends you're now seeing from the major cloud companies, and is it different pandemic to post-pandemic?
Wow. This is a wonderful question, Aaron. Let me chew on it for a second. I think you all have talked so much about multi-cloud and what the big cloud operators have been providing there. And that is something that I remember people talking about a lot at reInvent this past December, I guess it was. And that was emerging out of the pandemic. But I feel like probably IaaS became more widely adopted during the pandemic years. You're right, Aaron. And that has probably generally continued. And now it's a little bit different if you want to call it post-pandemic, even though I guess no one has declared an end.
Exactly.
I would say that. But I think it does feel like the market is in a slightly different phase from the, oh my gosh, we need to add capacity for software that we want to use, and we can't get into the data center. We can't add servers, that kind of thing. And so now you can get back into the server room in a lot of cases. The reasons for increasing or decreasing your cloud consumption now, I think, are different. And it feels like it's not a very clear story. It depends on who you ask. And it depends on which provider you're looking at specifically. But I do think generally there is a little bit of a different tone, which is maybe business is not expected to be quite as voluminous as it had been. So that for me is kind of what I want to know about. And I unfortunately can't predict a ton of the future. I could sort of predict that the cloud is going to be used in Q3 2022. But I don't know what happens in 2023. I don't know what happens in Q4 of this year. And so that to me is the big question. And it's all about the broad economy.
Right. I'm curious. So you cover Microsoft. When earnings season comes along, you also at least in terms of details. Like you'll cover Amazon, you cover Google, and so forth. But your primary focus is Microsoft, and we've always said Microsoft is a little bit unique in the cloud world in that they're first and foremost sort of an enterprise, mostly an enterprise technology company. Obviously, they're getting into gaming and some other stuff, but like they don't have these really distinctly different businesses. So like Amazon's got retail and Google's got search and ad and stuff. As you cover them, and then maybe you talk to your colleagues that cover an Amazon or cover Google, like how do you think about, like, do you feel like they're sort of unique in the cloud world, like, because they're just in this space, they're not having to fund other businesses. Like, are they able to strategically think about stuff differently? Do you feel like as you talk to them, as you cover them, do your peers that cover the other ones, is it like, it's kind of a part-time thing? Like how do you frame Microsoft, I guess, the question should be like, how do you frame Microsoft and the way they think about the world versus maybe the other, 2 or 3 that they oftentimes get compared to?
Yeah. Great, Brian. Let me see if I can answer all of like the 3, 4, 5 questions you asked there. Now I understand why people like to tell analysts to refrain from multi-part questions. So I would say first, I'm going to push back on your view of Microsoft, Brian.
Okay.
It's fair to say that they've been getting a little bit into games,
sure.
But it's all, and I mean, the biggest data point is Microsoft is in the middle of acquiring Activision Blizzard for almost $69 billion. That is a major cash outlay for sure. That is getting a little bit more into it, but they've been selling consoles for 21 years now. They happen to have some PC games that go back to the 1980s. And so with that, gaming is not new. And they also have this thing called LinkedIn.com, where you can look up people's online resumes. Yep. And other things, and bro poetry if you want, talking about corporate culture, and influencers. And anyway, there's also selling Surface PCs to the public, and that's also to business. But that's some more. And then just the final piece, Brian, is that Microsoft operates this thing. I don't know if you use it, but I know that I use it. It's this thing called Microsoft Bing. It's a search engine.
I've heard of that.
And that, yeah. So it's all advertising. And this thing is really a very significant player for competition against Google search. It's not very close to Google, but it's one of the very few at scale search engines that compete. And so there's meaningful revenue that comes from that. So anyway, I would say Microsoft is more diversified, in fact, than Amazon or Google, or if you want Alibaba, or Oracle or IBM, you can run it down. And so it is more protected from the flow of the economy, from a erosion perspective. If something were to happen to consumers, like the stimulus checks stop, I think Microsoft will be insulated a little bit more. And it goes the other way around too, because there's consumer exposure. Microsoft will be okay if suddenly all corporations are told that they're no longer able to acquire, buy Microsoft products, which is not a likely scenario, but it has so many lines of business that it's hard to really say it's going to be massively hit because of any one factor. So that's the first thing. The second thing is definitely Azure is not a part-time concern for Microsoft. And Microsoft thinks about it in a different way, primarily, I would say, because it has these long relationships with large companies, and it knows the field. The salespeople know the CFOs or the CIOs. They've been interacting with people inside of these large companies, we'll say 10,000 plus employees, for 10, 15, 20, 25 years. Not the same person, maybe. The people in the field have changed, but generally those relationships are longstanding. And so it comes naturally to say, hey, if you're interested in a migration or modernization, new application development, so you don't have to worry about capital expenditures, you might be interested in this thing we have called Microsoft Azure. Now, you might have heard about this Amazon Web Services phenomenon, but don't you worry, we have this thing called Azure that does, some of those things that Amazon Web Services can do. And so it does feel like something that is very much in the natural movement or posture for Microsoft to do, to sell this capacity to large companies that it knows. What is different about Amazon is the base that it developed came from these small companies that became bigger. I mean, Airbnb is a favorite example here. Pinterest. They were nothings, and then they became somethings. And they're contributing, we can say tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars potentially over, or 100, I should say, maybe in a year. That's a lot of money. And so you add enough of these and it becomes a meaningful base. That is not historically the Microsoft Azure story. Microsoft Azure has come up with enterprise agreements getting expanded to include Azure use and more, most recently the consumption of credits on Azure. And so I think that is a difference. Now, you were saying, is it a part-time thing, Brian? And I think this is you thinking about Google because there's this meme of Google maybe stopping, quitting, leaving behind the cloud business, just as it quit Feedly in 2013. Sorry, excuse me. I use Feedly as my RSS reader. Just as it quit Google Reader in 2013. And people went to all these different alternative ones. I don't know how many people are still using RSS, though. But I am. Are you guys using RSS?
Nope, not anymore.
No.
Oh, not since after they killed it, I used it. Yeah, I used the Google Reader for another couple of years, but no, I haven't. I just don't consume it that way anymore. It just is something that died on the vine.
That's fine. All right, I'll read RSS every day and I'll think of the two of you. Doing it for them. But anyway, I don't think that Google is going to quit cloud. I'm saying that convincingly, clearly. I might regret that in a couple years, but I don't think they're going to quit cloud. And so it's not, I would say it's not the main thing at Google, right? Advertising and specifically search is the main thing that is very profitable and sort of is a flip to the Amazon situation in that it pays for expansion in other areas. But yeah, I think Microsoft is in a situation where they will continue to reach out to customers in the base. And I would just guess, based on what I've read, more than half of Microsoft customers are not using Azure yet. So there's still a huge amount of growth to be had for them. I think it's definitely different.
Right. And Jordan, let me ask you this, because I think something else it comes up on the podcast. I mean, at least on all our yearly shows, but we're always kind of looking ahead of is there ever going to be any use cases or trends that's ever going to change the standings, right? Like you mentioned Alibaba, you mentioned Oracle Cloud, there's Cloudflare, there's DigitalOcean, right? Mm-hmm. Or is it always just hey, the market has consolidated around AWS, Azure, GCP? I mean, do you foresee a scenario in which somebody disrupts or challenges in this space?
Yeah, I mean, it is possible. And let's just go through one aspect, I would say the Microsoft aspect here, in the second quarter, based on what I can tell, Azure is doing about 63% of the revenue that Amazon Web Services is generating. 63, right? And that number in the first quarter of 2021 was 58%. So basically, Microsoft is getting larger and larger in cloud infrastructure. And that will, I guess, continue. So I think there is a real possibility down the line. I've seen analysts estimate that 2025, 2026, maybe, you could see Microsoft have the number one position in market share. I can't rule it out. It seems a little bit hard to believe because we've lived through this for so many years. And you all are certainly watching in the modern age of cloud infrastructure when Amazon has been putting out these numbers, allowing people to see the heft of this market. It's and all that time, right? Amazon has been the market leader. So to see that shift after, we'll call it almost 20 years, is sort of fascinating. I don't know if it will happen, but I think it's possible. The other thing I would say, and let me just say one other aspect about Microsoft, that it's a faster grower now than Alibaba or Google Cloud, even though Microsoft has a larger revenue base. And so these are slowing operations at Google and Alibaba, and it makes you wonder how much share the other smaller ones are picking up each year, where it does feel like the gains, the big gains, are coming to Microsoft. And then the other company that I think is very fascinating, that is not really a direct IaaS provider, but instead it has one thing, one product that competes against the IaaS vendors. It's Snowflake. And it's sort of hard to bend your brain and say, okay, Snowflake is an IaaS provider. In the old days, you might think of it as a different layer in the stack. I'm not going to say it. But I would say in one small way, it provides one element of what is part of the IaaS offering. And so I think thinking about Snowflake as a provider of a base level service, which is a data warehouse in the cloud, is a fascinating thing to see. And it does feel like they're taking share when you look at the data warehouse, data lake categories, even database. Yeah. So that is one I would not sleep on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right that the Google thing has always kind of fascinated us and stumped us a little bit. Like for a company that runs cloud so incredibly efficiently, right? I mean, it's at the core of what they do. It confuses us a little bit as to why they haven't grown faster. And then at the same time, we always come back to, but Google inherently doesn't like talking to people, and IT is inherently a people-centric business. So I'm curious. So you follow kind of the trends of revenue and growth rates and all sorts of things. But like, how much do people maybe not think about, or is it maybe not emphasize, like how important the CAPEX side of this is? Because in order for these companies to keep growing at huge rates, like they're having to make massive investments from a CAPEX perspective. Given that, do you feel like there's ever a point where some of these littler guys, a Cloudflare or whoever, can ever make a dent, or is this really going to just ultimately be about 2 or 3 that CAPEX is really the most dominant thing, and then the technology on top of it is sort of it is what it is?
I think I'll try to get at this in a way that answers your question and also makes a different point. Let me answer your question first. I think if there is no CAPEX, then there's no cloud. There's got to be a server somewhere, right? You all have been doing this for long enough to know the server, serverless doesn't mean no servers. Serverless needs servers. And so anyway, I think that these big three United States companies, Microsoft, Google, and Amazon, do know how to buy a lot of servers. And the Amazon one is more nuanced because there are other mechanisms through that Amazon uses, capital leases, to pick up the infrastructure that it needs. But we can generally say, I mean, this is $20+ billion at the maybe low end, and it goes up per year. And now let's just take a look at Microsoft, which is picking up its CAPEX again. It's at $8.7 billion for the most recent Q. 8.7 times 4 to annualize it, about $35 billion a year. That's not a nothing. This is a company that's investing in the infrastructure to deliver not just Azure, but all of the other online services that it operates. That includes Bing. That includes Office. GitHub. Well, we can talk about GitHub another time. But anyway, a lot of cloud services that Microsoft itself operates, Xbox, for example. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I think if there is a massive slowdown for Microsoft in CAPEX growth, you would say, what's going on here? I do look at these numbers, but there are not enough anomalies to really shout from the rooftops about it. There are other conversations going on about it, but for me, it's a lesser priority. And so, the other point I would just make is that there are companies that are doing very little in capital expenditures, and that are ostensibly in the cloud infrastructure market. And I'm going to take a second to pick on two companies here, if I can. And I think if you say that you're providing cloud infrastructure, but you're spending below $1 billion a year on cloud, on capital expenditures, then you have to wonder, where are the servers? Who is doing this? And so I do look at that, and I'll pick on IBM and on Oracle. And I think these companies might simply be getting more revenue growth from other areas and more income from other areas. Not surprising. It's stating a fact. So they might not want to buy, many billions of dollars each quarter in order to build out this infrastructure when the demand isn't there and when the cost structure isn't there to, add income. So I think if we can sort of directionally read the tea leaves from CAPEX, which I feel a little bit hinky about, but I'll just play along here. I don't know that the IaaS layer will be around for a very long time at these subscale operators, Oracle and IBM. That's my hot take.
Yeah. I think we'd agree. I think we'd agree with that.
So,
yeah, go ahead.
So Jordan, let me ask you this, and it kind of dovetails in a little bit into that. I mean, well, yeah, we have seen some slowing down. Some of it could be post-COVID, like we kind of talked about, however you want to define post-COVID. Some of it could be supply chain issues, right? Like you probably know more about this than I do, but I saw Azure, like over in EMEA, was having trouble with capacity and kind of putting, trials on hold and some other things like that, because they were just kind of running out of capacity in certain areas and certain data centers. And so, it becomes this really hard model of exactly what you just talked about of, you have to spend just enough to stay 5 minutes ahead of everyone. But then you could end up with too much capacity, or you could end up with not enough capacity. How much does that play into the larger picture? Like how often do they get caught flat-footed, or they don't have enough, or they have too much? And how does that play into the growth rates?
I think because capacity, this is just a excellent way of thinking about risks for growth. I just should say that, Aaron. It's not something that is coming up for the company that has had these high profile capacity issues at Microsoft. If it were, I think that Amy Hood, Microsoft CFO, or Satya, the CEO, would have called out that as an issue. Maybe growth would have been higher if we had not had the capacity constraint. And so it is a fascinating thing happening. And the only precedent that I know of for this, for these three companies, is at the beginning of the pandemic in 2020, where Microsoft had said, hey, we're going to prioritize certain workloads, including education on Azure. And so you simply won't be able to get some infrastructure, even though you might want it right now. We're sorry. That is just wild. And if you go back, the capacity issues that Microsoft had imposed at that time did not have financial consequences then, just as it does not seem to be now. And so I think it is fascinating to think we have supply constraints that we've been hearing about for everything. I was just talking with a colleague in our bureau about how there's a shortage of quarters, shortage of so many other things in life. And certainly if you can't get the servers that you need, maybe you'd think it would be an issue. But these are well-oiled procurement organizations at these large companies that know how and where to get servers. And storage, switches, everything you need, UPS. And so I think it's not a huge drag on operations right now. If it were to become more protracted and intense, we'll say that, gosh, I mean, if you want to think about crazy manufacturing stoppages, beyond just the COVID lockdowns, where the ODMs in Taiwan might be less able to churn out boxes and send them to the data centers these companies have, then it could be. But right now, I think it feels like it's sort of a lesser issue. It's worth paying attention to, and it's certainly fascinating to talk with people about. I think it's not quite material at this point.
Yeah. I want to ask you one last question. I want to be conscious of your time. We've dug into a lot of stuff, and as we always recommend to people, your stuff goes into really, really good detail, week in and week out.
Thank you, Brian.
As a reporter, and people ask us this, we always get this, comes up when when earnings season comes along and so forth. Like, what are the things that you wish were more transparent? You look at the company, you look at their numbers, you look at what are the things you're like, what am I missing here? What are they not telling me? What are they hiding behind something? And I don't mean to kind of pick on Microsoft, but Microsoft of all the cloud providers feels like the one who's, kind of puts, well, I should say IBM does this the most, but let's call out Microsoft because you cover them. What do you wish they were more transparent about? What would give you a better picture of how healthy the business is, or where they're doing well or not doing well?
Thanks for giving me the soapbox, Brian. This is a lovely thing to give me.
We're gonna step back and give you room.
Yeah. So let's just deal with the one that you mentioned here, Microsoft. Azure has been around for coming up on 15 years. And we don't know the actual size of that business. We know the actual size of Google Cloud, which includes Google Workspace, that's Gmail for work, etc. And we know the when What we don't know is how big Microsoft Azure is. And so that's the top line, the revenue in dollars, and the, I would call it operating income of Microsoft Azure, so that we can simply compare it with the other cloud providers. And so there are estimates, and I sort of drew on them before to give you a sense of how big Azure is versus AWS, but we don't know for sure. And it will vary by hundreds of millions of dollars if you look at a couple analysts. And so I think market sizing is hard. Certainly Gartner is, informed, but not totally informed, and their peers about how large these companies are, what market share actually is. So it would be great to get those numbers, and that fuels, where you might want to go to get a job, for example, who's growing, where you might want to bring your partner solution to, which cloud you want to go to first. So many things come from that, and we're still in the dark. And Microsoft really ought to, and I'm not the first person to say this at all, but Microsoft really ought to clean that up. The second point I would say is that Amazon Web Services is almost $20 billion per quarter now. So, 4x that, it's $80 billion run rate. Not a bad number. There are so many services, over 200 services as part of Amazon Web Services, that I think we ought to have information on the amount of revenue coming from the biggest services. And so that would include EC2 and S3. And I don't need a 200 item breakdown of the P&L of Amazon Web Services, but I could really use some more disclosure around the big ones. And just to make it a little bit clearer for people, I would love to be able to benchmark against Cloudflare, DigitalOcean that got mentioned before, Backblaze, Snowflake, and see how these other operators are doing relative to the big ones. And just to add one little additional wrinkle, it would be nice to understand the operating margin from these big services as well, so the operating income. And then I think it would also be nice to get the smaller cloud providers in the United States to disclose the size of their cloud infrastructure layers. That's Oracle and IBM. So that way we can see what is happening with these cloud businesses.
Right,
Good.
right.
Good stuff, Jordan. Like I mentioned at the top of the show, we've sort of been back and forth to you, communicating with you via the internet. It was great to do it live and in person for the first time.
Yes.
To introduce you to our audience. You already have an audience of millions, so we're introducing you to a small little niche of the internet. But we
love you all.
We appreciate the time. Where if for some reason people have been hiding under a rock, they're not following your stuff, where can they go find you on the Twitters, on CNBC.com, all the other places?
Twitters and CNBC.com are the two, Brian. CNBC.com/technology if you want to follow our technology coverage. And please do also follow on television. I'm just twitter.com/Jordan Novett. And cloud infrastructure is a thing I do talk about a lot, just like you all. So thanks for asking me. And I just want to say it's awesome to be part of what I feel like is my people. I feel like we should have done this a long time ago.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Aaron,
thanks for having me.
Aaron, you want to wrap it up and take us home?
Yes, absolutely. So Jordan, thank you so much for that. Really learned a lot. And for everyone out there, please tell a friend, leave a review or rating if you get your podcast wherever you do. If you have that ability, do that. And lastly, if you have ideas for guests, we're always looking for guests, and the email is usually best, or Twitter, but the email is show@thecloudcast.net. And so for that, I'm going to say thank you to Jordan and for everyone for listening this week, and we will talk to everyone next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.